Thank you very much for your kind words. Actually, 99% of the work is done by you, but okay, thank you very much. I'll try to give you some kind of general view of what happened in the last, let's say, 50, 60 years, even if something that started earlier. And since it was quoted and is also part of the program, the term of utilitas, and we heard that unfortunately we are focusing some time a lot on that. I have to admit that you can talk about, when my students are making beautiful projects, etc., it's very frustrating when they show these beautiful drawings. And since I like to have a participation of public, participation of politics, participation of normal people, as I said earlier, that are going to be the users of buildings, sometimes it's frustrating, but it's the real life. Listening people that instead of appreciating the project, they ask, yes, but how much does it cost? Where are the parking lots? This is because architecture cannot be separated by other disciplines. It's something that is involving social science, economy, real estate, climate changes, everything. When I was a student in the 80s, I grew up as a student of architecture with a professor that were saying that the only way to solve the problem of housing was to build monsters like Corviale in Rome or the Zen in Palermo. And later, I decided to do like a St. Thomas and put the finger and see if that was true or not. And I discovered that in July 15, 1972, it was demolished, the Protego, and it was demolished because it was considered harmful for the working class living there. It was considered something extremely dangerous, socially speaking. And Charles Jenks said that the demolition of the Protego was the death of those utopias. In Italy, we are so smart that just 5 days later, we decided to build the Corviale in Rome. Come on. Today, we are doing a lot of shopping malls, while the United States, where the shopping malls have been invented, is dismantling those things. So we are always arrive late and late and late. And we are taking things that are abandoned abroad because probably the same investor that are making those things abroad knows that there are countries with the stupid people that are accepting those things. Then, since utilitas, it's important, since costs are important, I spent a lot of time of my life in the archive of Rome, but I also, I'm so crazy that I restudied all the laws, all the tools made in Italy, made in Rome, after the unification of Italy, because really I was puzzling, thinking that the best kind of buildings, modern buildings, were those built in the worst period when really people were pressing Rome, new inhabitants. The city of Rome before unification is 165,000 of inhabitants. In 60 years become a city of 1,200,000 of inhabitants. Nevertheless, we have quarters like San Saba, like Testaccio, like Città Giardino Niene, like Garbatella. So I decided to study those things, and I went beyond because by accident I found the real bottom line costs of these buildings, and not only the bottom line costs, but also the time needed for the construction of these things. Today we are living in a period where there are no money, no project to solve the problem of the refugees, and you are going to be surprised of something I discover. So when I wrote these things that I published in a book that is called The Sustainable Cities Possible, which is something that is really possible if we simply, instead of reinventing the wheel every day, we simply watch at the back and see if we were able to do something, if something was successful, how we can do it. So I decided also to make an estimation, and I made the estimation of the construction cost of Corviale that was presented by my professor as the unique way to solve the problem of housing. And I discovered that was necessary to have 7.5 years to have the first 122 apartments available. And the cost of construction per square meters was roughly 900 euros. As I said, I wrote many books on these studies I made. Someone was translated in Latvia. As you can see, it was also translated, one of my book. And when I'm talking about social housing, I'm not talking about social housing as a working class district, because on those days, people were wise enough to understand that the segregation was making the problem even worse. It was necessary to have integration of people. So when we are talking about the building of the social housing districts, social housing institute, we're talking about mixed use, mixed income buildings. Because the strategy they made on those days was allowed, in reality, the Comune di Roma to solve the economical problem. The Comune was in bankruptcy because, like what we are doing today, everything was demanded on private investors, and the Comune was just paying the bills, and step by step it went to crack. Differently, they codify a fantastic system that, if today will be retaken in consideration, investing the money of the PNRR for this kind of intervention, we can solve the problem of the environment, we can solve the social problem of the social disease of the suburbia, we can have alternative to the historical centers, because if the historical centers are overcrowded is because people are coming from the suburbia looking for the spaces that have been denied on their districts. And especially the private investors, instead of convincing the politicians to make laws like the Legge per la rigenerazione urbana, the law for the urban regeneration, which is something that is in any region existing, they convinced the politician to involve also the historical center for the regeneration urbana, allowing the demolition and substitution of historical buildings, because today we heard about the needs of piazze, the people that are going to the centers, but why those people are going to the center is because they identify themselves in the center. But now we have the builders that want to build in the historical centers because they know if they build in the suburbia, the real estate is not successful like building next to a wonderful buildings. And when you will find the pamphlet for the real estate, you will read a fantastic view toward something. They never talk about the view from the opposite direction, where you will have a punch on your eyes. So this is a building that is belonging to the social housing. It's a building in Testaccio, built in 1926. It's a mixed income, mixed function. And today, if you want to buy an apartment there, it is about 11,000, 12,000 euro per square meter. These are other social housing. This is Città Giardino Aniene. This is Garbatella. This is Garbatella, and this is Appio. These are the district Flaminio. All buildings of the very beginning of the 20th century. This is Palermo, the Quartiere Matteotti in Palermo. And about the time, this was really shocking me. The first 44 houses of the district San Saba were started in October 1908. In April 1909, were families already living there. Those buildings had never been restored in more than 100 years. And this is something that costs only 568 euro per square meter. if we reevaluate the money, the costs of those days. So we're talking about a difference of 400 euros per square meter compared to the Corviale that took 7.5 years to be finished. Well, to have the first 122 houses. And these buildings are very simple, are buildings where the architect designed the building and then working hand in hand with the craftsmen, they made this beautiful decoration with the bricks. I made this study for all the different kind of typology of houses built at the beginning of the 20th century. And at the end, what I discovered is that everything I was studying took very few months to be built, maybe 1 year, and the costs that were extremely reasonable. Why this is no longer possible? If we take the lot number 24 of Garbatella, it was conceived as a kind of demonstrative project. It was given 1 month for the design and 4 months for the construction. The buildings are still there. So what's the hell of saying that there is no way to solve the problem of refugee, for instance, if these are the real time of construction? These are the buildings built in 4 months at the lot number 28. So why they were so fast on those days? Because the way, the practice of construction was based on this manuali di costruzione, one of the most beautiful and really beautiful book, not in terms of content because it's beautiful, the issue, but it's beautiful because of the representation. Every little part of the building is well documented with the watercolors, from the foundation to the scaffolding to the centering. Everything is extremely well represented. It's the manuali of Formenti. This is 1909. And this was not used only in Italy, but it was used also, for instance, in Argentina. Many South American countries where a lot of Italians are living use to work with the construction method made by Formenti in this manual. And this is something that is not some kind of pacifist approach that is related with antiquities, because he was open-minded enough, like also Viollet-le-Duc, that was considered the criminal of the false restoration, simply because he was afraid of the French medieval heritage versus the Beaux-Arts system. And as you can see, there are iron details, there are iron beams, tie beam, tie rod, that are used in the construction method, which is not falsification. It's a system to make the building even more secure, but in the same time have a perfect behavior in terms of thermoeconomic system. One of the interesting solution on those days in the construction was the use of these shallow vaults of bricks between one and the other beams, which were the same iron beams used for the railways. And this is something that was allowing the construction without waiting the 28 days of reinforced concrete. And everything was working very, very well. But now, talking about the costs and the real estate. In 2020, it was launched an auction for selling one of the houses built in 6 months at the San Saba. And the starting price for the auction was 1 million of euro, which means 11.1111 euros per square meter, social housing. Now, if we want to be even more evil, we can compare this cost to the current constant construction, and if we compare, also considering their thermal behavior, to the green architecture, the bioarchitettura LEED architecture, we discovered that those buildings cost up to 73% less than these costs. Who's saying the lies? Now say, okay, you are a dreamer, you are doing those things without being sure about what are you talking about. This is a wine cellar built in 2009 in Gorizia. Each one of these spaces is a 6 by 6 meter, built with a sail vault, built by one worker alone, with some guy that was passing the bricks, and is built with a technique that doesn't need any centering. So we're talking about every space that is 36 square meters. But now, making the real cost, I want to be very gentle, and I take the costs of labor in the region of Milan, which is the more expensive in Italy, and I can discover that the construction of this building that is 648 square meters, in terms of labor, cost only 45,000 euros. What is costing is not the material, is labor. So if we can use techniques that are shortening the construction, we can have low costs. So it's time to say, okay, shut up when those are going to tell you that the traditional methodology is more expensive than modern one. Because if I start presenting the real bottom line costs of the Nuvola di Fuxas, the Vela di Calatrava, and all these monstrosities that have been realized recently, I think you will take a gun. If I make a comparison of the thermal behavior, since someone can say, okay, you are talking according to your ideology, I take a book written by engineers of hygrometric, thermohygrometric evaluation, and I can see that traditional buildings are behaving better than any kind of modern building, and they are not generating the damp point that is going to bring the condensation inside the building, which is causing asthma, some problem that Le Corbusier didn't took in consideration when he built the Villa Savoie, and then he was sued by the owners because their child started suffering of asthma. But now, what we can do about this lesson? In 1909, the Prime Minister Giovanni Giolitti was afraid because of the bankruptcy of the Comune di Roma, and he was complaining because people were not smart enough on those days to realize that it was necessary to buy the land around the Campus Martius to make a good investment. And then he said, this speech. Now, I want to show you what is happening if, considering what was the complaint of Giolitti, we consider and we watch the glass as a half full instead of half empty. We consider that thanks to the ridiculous absurdity of the modern urbanism, which is the urbanism of standards, the urbanism of number, we inherited an incredible amount of land that belongs to the state, is the demanio pubblico. So instead of continuing building in a private land in the middle of nowhere, 3 meters beyond the sign "Welcome on the Planet Earth," we can recompact the city, filling those voids, which means having no cost for the land. Obviously, this is something that is not making speculators happy. But if we really deal with sustainability and the environment, we have to do that. Obviously, we can't imagine to disrupt the social life of those poor people that were obliged to live in the monster ground scraper. But if we fill the spaces, if we save many infrastructure, if we respect the topography step by step, we can move from this monster, we can build the first buildings. When these buildings are ready, we can move about a few meters the inhabitants and demolish the next buildings. And step by step, we can move to a borgo where we have 5 piazzas. Thank you. But urban design, it doesn't mean only to design blocks. It's necessary. Urbanism is design of the voids, is the design of spaces for gathering people. So it's necessary to think about the pedestrian life. And as you can see on the main street, you can have 5 piazze, one next to the other. Watching at the model of the building, the districts of the beginning of the 20th century, it's possible to have the permeability inside this courtyard where you can display gardens, where you can display playground for children, where you can display spaces for the leisure of the elders. Obviously, we have to think about the circulation, with the peripheral circulation for the main circulation and local traffic in the center where people can drop off whatever they have to do and then they disappear. In the basement of the building, we can have a parking. Around the district, we can have parkings on the street for public. Obviously, instead of building a shopping mall, you can have a widespread shopping mall with the shops on the bottom of the ground floor along the major street, while in the secondary street you can have a workshop for the workers that wants to have the bottega just below their feet, below their houses. We can plan the green spaces, thinking at the public green, the private green, the semi-private, and obviously the agriculture. And then we need to consider that a city works, as Leon Krier always says, when you have the overlapping of the res publica and res privata or economica, so the public buildings, widespread justifying the piazze, and the private buildings, mixed use private building, and then you have the civitas. If we have this, obviously we have to say, how much does it cost? Okay, let's say what is the cost. I made an evaluation of the cubic meters of public buildings. I made an evaluation of private buildings. And this allowed me also to understand how many inhabitants I can put there. I can have even 2,000 inhabitants more than what we have now in Corviale. And at the end, this means that I can also have houses for sale and shop for sale. But one of the most interesting aspects is that the present Corviale consume 29, almost 30 hectares. The future one can give back almost 12 hectares to the countryside. And when I'm talking about the courtyard, I'm talking about the courtyard of the district I shown you, because this was the request of the inhabitants of Corviale when in 2000 were interviewed by the inspector that came to understand the reason of the bankruptcy of the ICP. And when he asked he made a kind of referendum asking, what is your idea of a house? And everybody said, we would like to live in a place like Garbatella. So if we simply respond to the needs of these people, and as you can see still today in the courtyard of Garbatella, kids are playing inside public spaces instead of getting stupid in front of some PlayStation. And so at the end, I made some rendering, some quick watercolor to show what could be the character of this place inspired from the architecture they were looking for. So this is a view of the main piazza from the town hall to the elementary kindergarten school. This is a view from the opposite direction. This is a view of one of the courtyard with one of the garden where you can see the playground on the right side. This is a view of the infilade of piazze nearby the Market Loggia, and this is the view at the ground level of the Market Loggia, and the opposite view of the Market Loggia and the church. This is a view of the extreme board of the one of the district where the public part starts. And this is a view of the piazza leading to the movie theater at the end. Obviously, I made an estimation of the cost of construction using the cost of construction that are documented every year by the Association of the Architects in Italy. And using this parameter, I have only less than 7 minutes, so I need to accelerate. What is happening is that I made an estimation of the demolition cost of Corviale based on the real bottom line cost of demolition of one of the monster building Le Vele in Napoli, and used these costs for the demolition cost of Corviale. I evaluated how much does it cost to build the Corviale, the new Corviale in that manner, and at the end I have some investment of almost €500,000 of euros. But what is interesting is that from the sale of the exceeding apartment, from the sale of the parking, from the sale of all the other public buildings, for the sale of the shop, the workshop, at the end, even using a real estate value less than what it is today, we can have a public profit of 589 millions of euro possible to be invested for the transformation, for the regeneration of another suburbia without reinventing the wheel, but simply taking in consideration the lesson of the earliest 20th century. After this project, 200 inhabitants of the most difficult district of Italy, lo Zen di Palermo, decided to tax themselves to give me some symbolic reimbursement to see if this was possible to be done also for their district. I accepted this social challenge, and just to, well, something has to be said, because earlier we were talking about the claim technique and the falseness of all these star. Vittorio Gregotti, the architect of Zen di Palermo, when he built the Zen in Palermo, he said that that building was the interpretation in architecture of the ideal of the New Jerusalem, the place of the classless society. In 2007, he was interviewed by the journalist of Le Iene, this TV show, and the journalist asked him, wasn't possible to do it better? He said, better than this is impossible, it's marvelous. I say, but would have, you know, why don't you live there? And his answer for the New Jerusalem district was, what are you talking about? I'm doing the architect, I'm not a proletarian. This is horrible shame. So this is the Zen that is a kind of the jail, as you can see. And even in this case, filling the voids, step by step, it's possible to create a borgo. And even in this case, I made all the evaluation costs. I evaluated the 10-minute walk with this diameter, the distances of the main streets, the street market, because many of the inhabitants of the Zen are selling their goods at the 3 street market, but they would like to have one near their feet. Every 2 minutes there is a piazza or piazzetta. There are a lot of spaces, brown for kids, yellow for elder, all the schools necessary for this little city, all the sports activity with the buffer zone to create some buffer zone from the peripheral street around, all the sports, because I was asked by the inhabitants to increase as much as possible the presence of sport activity to prevent the possibility to be kidnapped by the mafia in Palermo for the kids, having distraction from this activity. Even in this case, having shops and workshops along the main street, having the street market, the green, all the public buildings, res publica, res privata, and civitas, all the evaluation in terms of cubic meters and in terms of inhabitants. And even in this case, instead of having public cost, with a city little village from 60,000 of inhabitants, we can have 21,000 of inhabitants. And at the end, we can have a profit for 255 millions of euros instead of wasting our money with the construction impossible of the bridge on Messina. These are views I made, which obviously are speaking about the language of Palermo, not the one language of Rome. Thank you.